there are about 3 terms from last time's list that I wanted to go through before we moved on today. And this relates to the issue of, in a sense, how we explain decision-making in the Third Reich, and to continue with what we're talking about as kind of the model of the Third Reich. Yeah. How's it now? Better? We're getting kind of an echo. Maybe I better put it down further. How's this? Is this better? Yeah. Yeah. Good. Thanks. So I'd finished up last time talking about what I'd call the neo-feudal model of National Socialism, in which I had described the Third Reich as the opposite of their mythical image of Ein Reich, ein Volk, ein Führer, one nation, one leader, one people. But in fact, the structure of the Third Reich was one of competing power blocks organized by competing followers of Hitler, vying with one another for Hitler's favor, for new grants of power, new jurisdictions, new authorizations. And thus, the Third Reich was, in a sense, in constant flux as the power of some of Hitler's followers would grow and others would decline at different times during the 12 years of Nazi rule. And that raises the question, a sense of how did decisions get taken? Why were some parts of Nazi ideology fulfilled and others were not? What was the way, in a sense, in which Hitler's ideas that we had talked about earlier, how it was the mechanism by which they got transformed into reality? How did theory turn into practice? One attempt at this was articulated by the German historian Martin Broschat, and he invented the term negative selection. And his idea there was that Hitler, in fact, offered all sorts of things to all sorts of Germans. In fact, he was making lots of promises to all sorts of people, building, as I said, a cross-class kind of coalition. And this meant that once he came to power, in fact, he could not please everybody. Because what you would promise to some people would inevitably clash with or conflict with what you might have promised to others. Promises to include the working class in a more egalitarian way would clash with promises to the industrialists that they would curb working class power, and so on and so forth. And this is what, of course, happens to any political leader that comes into power, who has had to campaign and try to gain as many votes as he can by promising as many things to as many people as possible. Once you're into power, the reality that you cannot realize all of those promises becomes immediate. And for Broschat, then, he said the part of the buffet of offerings that Hitler put on the table that could actually get eaten, that could actually be put into practice, were those in which you had the most negative consequences. The more positive aspects of the Nazi regime almost invariably involved a conflict with some other people that Hitler was also indebted to. So promises to the working class would conflict with promises to the industrialists, and you would have what some political scientists have called countervailing powers, that they would checkmate each other. Hitler, never wanting to disappoint or to lose, basically would procrastinate or would try to fudge, just as he tried to fudge between the summer of 1933 and June of 34, between Röhm and the essay on the one hand and the military on the other. At some points, he couldn't dodge making hard decisions, but in other areas, he basically could. And so what Broschat's arguing is that those promises that could be carried out at the expense of the most marginal, the most helpless, the least protected, the ones that had no clout and had no countervailing force, could proceed very quickly. And those that could only be carried out at the expense of someone else's interests, who was also influential with Hitler, would get stalemated. So it was more the negative aspects of Hitler's program or Hitler's platform, to do things to Jews, to do things to Gypsies, to Roma and Sinti, to do things to the asocials. These could be done because they had no clout, they had no countervailing role in the system, and therefore the way in which Nazism could express itself was increasingly negatively and increasingly destructively. What bad things it could do to helpless people would be where the regime could become particularly dynamic and progress without too much opposition. In other areas of social reform, almost invariably, Hitler would run into a conflict of interest between different groups to whom he did not want to have to choose between, and therefore delay and stalemate would often be the result. So Borchardt was trying to explain why it was the Nazi regime took on such destructive dynamic, such a policy basically of persecution of the least defended peoples in society, while others remain relatively unthreatened and untouched. Hans Mommsen invents the term cumulative radicalization. And the notion there is that in a neo-feudal system, when everybody is vying for Hitler's favor, the only way you win that competition is to outbid your rivals. So whatever your rival proposes, you find something more radical, more snazzy, and that this is how you try to make sure that Hitler favors you, gives you jurisdiction over solving that problem rather than somebody else. So that here again is an attempt to understand why the Nazi regime could become so destructive, that the more radical the proposal brought to Hitler, often this is the most attractive. No one is going to outbid their rivals by saying, we must be more moderate, or we have gone too far and we must back off. That those who are urging the more dynamic and radical proposals are going to win the day, are going to appeal to Hitler. Those promising moderation or urging to give up something you've started and say, we really shouldn't have done that, we really should back off, is not going to get very far. So there's a kind of ratchet nature to Nazi decision-making. Hitler will take a decision. Once he's done that, he almost never will reverse himself. He won't admit error. Sometimes he then will pause, but the only way to get things in motion again is not by rescinding a previous decision, but by going beyond a previous decision and doing something even more. So we'll see when we're looking at Jewish policy in particular, how there'll be periods of lurching forward, periods of dynamic change, and then kind of pauses, but never retreats. Because the Nazi system, a kind of ratchet system, I said, no one in this system would go to Hitler and said, you made a mistake, reverse what you did. You don't get far with Adolf Hitler telling him that he made a mistake and he has to undo what he has done. But you can get far if you go there telling him now is the time to go even more radically, to go even beyond what you have done before. So you have both a one-way decision-making process that only can get more radical from what it's done, but one that will kind of be sporadic and at periods of calm and then another offensive or a series of initiatives and then a period of calm again. And this would be explained in Mommsen's term of this cumulative radicalization in the nature of who and what kinds of proposals can win Hitler's favor. This all viewing Hitler not as the micromanager from above, pulling the strings and making all of the decisions in some kind of well-planned way, but rather Hitler acting fairly impulsively to the situation he finds himself in, and then occasionally going on these binges of decision-making and radicalization. A third phrase that has become quite common in the literature is a quote from a speech of a middle-level Nazi functionary that the biographer of Hitler, Ian Kershaw, found in his research, and that is the term working towards the Fuhrer. And in this speech, this middle-aged functionary talking to lower members of the Nazi Party over whom he supervised was explaining to them in a Nazi Germany, you don't wait around for instructions. It's not just a matter of obeying orders. Being a good Nazi is not waiting to be told what to do and then doing it obediently. In Nazi Germany, you take initiative, you don't wait for orders, you work towards the Fuhrer. You anticipate what needs to be done, you anticipate what Hitler wants to be done, what Hitler wishes to be done, and you go out and get it done without bothering the leader for having to get authorization. You take the ball and you run with it. That good Nazis are initiators, good Nazis are go-getters, good Nazis understand the ideology and the general direction that Nazism is taking, that they can go out and make things happen without waiting to be told what to do and how to do it. And working towards the Fuhrer, anticipating what he needs, what he wants, and doing all of this on your own is what makes a dynamic Nazi, and dynamic Nazis rise in the neo-feudal system. They are the ones that are going to be recognized and rewarded, and passive Nazis waiting to be told what to do are going to fall by the wayside and basically become non-entities and build no career and go nowhere. So working towards the Fuhrer becomes a very vital concept for understanding, again, why things happen in Nazi Germany and why things happen the way they do in Nazi Germany, with Hitler, in effect, often not even being the decision maker, not even being consulted, but people figuring out and anticipating what he wants done. Another this was expressed by, I think, by Reinhard Heydrich, Heinrich Himmler's deputy, when he was explaining the kind of people he needed were the kind of people that relieved him of 95% of the decisions that needed to be made. The big decisions, yes, bring to him, but the really valuable follower was the one who took care of most of what needs to be taken care of without bothering him, without coming to his desk and putting on his desk something he has to read and sign. And so this understanding of the Nazi ethos, of the followers of Hitler, of what it meant to be a good Nazi, was basically to relieve your superior of most of the burden of his work by doing it without being micromanaged, doing it without being told what to do. And this we'll see is a crucial component of understanding the dynamism of the Nazi regime and the capacity of many to have what were called in Nazi Germany lightning careers, to take moves that attract the attention of superiors, to get rapid promotion, to move up quickly. And the Nazi regime offered, for what had been a relatively conservative society, where what you could do in your life depended upon what part of society you were born into, what you could be led, what were the narrow parameters of opportunities open to you. Nazi Germany offered up social mobility on a scale unprecedented in previous German history. And for many Nazis, part of the loyalty they have to the regime, part of the zeal that they feel about Nazism, is the incredible new opportunities it gave to them for the previously socially disadvantaged, who now can make careers that would have been unheard of in Kaiser's Germany or in Weimar Germany, where they now, in a sense, have opportunities to exploit their talents and their abilities that they would not have had previously, because of this notion, really, of working towards the Fuhrer and winning your spurs, in effect, in how you perform your duties. Okay, having looked at those three terms, they are moving to list 6. There are two other terms that you're going to encounter in the reading that we also have to look at. So we're having kind of a big vocabulary lesson here at the beginning in terms of the vocabulary of Nazi historiography. And these are intentionalism and functionalism. Sometimes you'll see the term structuralism instead of functionalism. And these terms convey, in fact, something wider than simply the history of Nazi Germany. They, in fact, represent two basic approaches to how historians have gone about trying to explain why history happens the way it happens. How do you explain why things took place, why we are here the way we are today? The intentionalists basically see history as made by leaders who carry out policies to realize their intentions, to realize their goals, and these goals are usually encapsulated in a political ideology. So for the intentionalists, they are looking at great men in history making the decisions that basically determine which way history goes. And particularly in Nazi Germany, it is going to be Hitlerocentric. The focus will be on Hitler. Your focus will be on his ideology. What is it that Hitler wanted to accomplish? And the assumption that explaining why things happened the way they did in Nazi Germany is explaining how Hitler went about making his intentions come true, of finding the path to realize his intentions, to realize his ideological goals. So the approach generally is looking at Hitler, the ideas in his mind, understanding how Hitler saw things, and then interpreting the decisions he makes as basically a conscious and often premeditated or planned or programmatic step-by-step to realize the goals and the intentions that he preconceived. So the language we'll see in these will often talk about Hitler's program, Hitler's grand design, Hitler's goals, and how, in fact, he basically, things happened because he wanted them to happen. And what he wanted to happen, we understand by understanding the ideas in his mind, his ideology. So that it is a top-down view. It is one that emphasizes human agency, and above all, the human agency of leaders who have the power, unlike most of us, to have our wishes and our desires realized. That you have, with the powers that Hitler had, he could in fact make the decisions that would turn his ideology, his theory, into practice, into reality. The functionalists or structuralists say, well, yes, leaders are important and they do make decisions, but in fact they do not operate in some kind of vacuum, that they operate in very constrained circumstances, that leaders very rarely have the clean sweep to do as they want, that they have to choose between limited options, limited by all sorts of kind of constraints that follow, that surround them, and that history is as much or more often shaped by anonymous forces that limit what people can do, and that while people make history, they seldom make the history they want to make. And that these, you can talk both about more general anonymous forces. Leaders are constrained by what the economic power of their state is, the size of the army they can build, the size of the armies in the other countries that stand in their way, the constraints of their domestic following and what their followers will want and what they would not accept. That politicians operate in a very constrained field. They don't simply go out and turn their dreams into reality without having to deal with all sorts of contingencies and all sorts of constraints that they face. And therefore, functionalism refers to how the system functions. What is the Nazi system within which Hitler operates? And how does the functioning of that system limit what he can do and shape what he can do? So this is going to emphasize, as I say, contingency rather than premeditated grand design. It's going to emphasize the limits on human agency rather than unfettered human agency. And it's going to look, in a sense, at how much of history depends upon not reaching the end you want, but all of the unintended consequences, all of the unplanned things that happen, that when you make move A, suddenly you realize that simply doesn't get you to A. gets you to A, but complicated by B, C, and D, and that the reality of governing is a far messier muddling through than simply the great leader taking decisions and making things happen based upon his intentions. So contingency, improvisation, reaction to changing circumstances, muddling through is going to characterize the way, in a sense, which functionalists, how they will describe things happening, as opposed to the emphasis on Hitler, his leadership, and his ideas and decisions. Now, obviously, these are not mutually exclusive, but we're talking about where one puts the emphasis. But those two, for a while, those were almost treated as warring factions that fought this out in a kind of historiographical trench warfare that characterized much of the 70s and 80s earlier, before a more synthetic kind of view that said these aren't mutually exclusive and we have to look at, in fact, both of these to understand what happened, began to prevail. But those are certainly the two warring schools of historical explanation that were existing at the point that historians began to seriously look at the Holocaust and to try to explain, in particular, the events leading up to the Holocaust, the origins of the final solution, the development of Nazi Jewish policy. And so we do have to keep those in mind in terms of how they shaped what historians, the lenses through which historians were looking at things at the time, and the ways of interpretation that they had in mind, one might say, when they were engaged in the early research into these topics. These two terms, in fact, were invented by Tim Mason, a British historian, in 1979. He was describing a situation that was already developing, this kind of binary way of interpreting Nazi Germany, and it became even more sharp, particularly in the 80s. And what it really had applied much to things like Hitler's foreign policy earlier. In the 80s, it got applied very specifically to Nazi Jewish policy and to the decisions that ultimately led to the final solution, an area that historians had not really looked at earlier because they simply assumed it happened because Hitler decided to do it, and he decided to do it when the time was opportune. Once you introduce the notion, well, there may be many other factors here other than just an autonomous Hitler operating freely, then this whole debate spurred lots of good historical research, but also polarized it, at least for a while. If Tim Mason is one name to know, because he's the one who invented these terms of intentionalism and functionalism, a second name that sort of helped to offer initially the opposite view to the traditional intentionalist one, of it happened because Hitler wanted it to happen, was a book by Karl Schleich. And it was, in a sense, kind of the birth of functionalism in terms of Holocaust history, called The Twisted Road to Auschwitz. And as the title implies, he is arguing for an evolution of Nazi Jewish policy that zigged and zagged, that followed a twisted road, that was not simply a step-by-step realization of a grand design or an opportune realization of a premeditated program, but one in which the Nazis explored, tried alternatives, ran into roadblocks, meant unexpected difficulties and unintended consequences, and had to feel their way. That they knew they wanted to solve the Jewish question, but what it meant to solve the Jewish question, and why they ultimately came to a consensus that solving the Jewish question meant total and systematic mass murder of every last Jew in Europe that they could lay their hands on, was for Schleich not at all the notion at the beginning. They set out on a path, a twisted road. They didn't know where exactly they were going. They knew vaguely a destination, solving the Jewish question, but what that meant would emerge in the very course of traveling that twisted road. So that, in a sense, is what historians looking into the origins of the final solution had as the alternative to the programmatic view that Hitler knew from the beginning what he was going to do, and Auschwitz was simply the realization of a grand design he had in mind from 1919 or 1921 or some very early date that various people would assign. So what I want to do today and probably into Tuesday is to go through in some detail the path Nazi Jewish policy does follow, and I will argue that it is indeed a twisted road. It is not a straight, direct realization of a premeditated program, and that it does zig and zag, but that Hitler is a key and important decision maker that at various points is necessary for him to resolve various roadblocks or conflicts that the Nazis have encountered, to choose between alternative forks in the road and which one will Nazi Germany take. To say the Nazis, of course, came to power at the end of January of 1933, and the first and foremost goal they have to do is how to consolidate power, how to carry out the Gleichschaltung, which we talked about last time, how to construct a dictatorship in which Hitler's power is no longer threatened, no one has any reasonable way to oppose him or to oust the regime. And so doing away with Hitler's real enemies, the communists and the social democrats, and taming and mastering his temporary allies, the old right, obviously is the political game that is going to be first and foremost. But he can also deal with his ideological and imaginary enemy, the Jews. The two are not exclusive. Hitler can walk and chew gum at the same time, and the Nazi regime can. And certainly, many of the Nazis themselves are very anxious to immediately have their day in the streets with the Jews, to attack this phantom of Jewish threat. And so in the upheaval and the street fighting and the persecution of all of Hitler's enemies in the first months when he comes to power, needless to say, Jews are not exempt. And perhaps the most prominent display of spontaneous action by Nazi radicals at the grassroots level is to attack the Jewish position in the judiciary, to claim that German justice is for Germans and German courtrooms are for German judges and lawyers. And so you get in various cities in Germany, not as part of some plan, not as part of some order from above, but depending upon the initiative of various local Nazis organizing their goon squads of Nazis to break into German courtrooms, chase out Jewish judges, chase out Jewish lawyers, and proclaim that they will purge the practice of German justice of any Jewish contamination. So this is a surge from below, and one way in which party radicals can, in a sense, immediately exercise their own initiative and carry out what was often referred to as direct action, was often the term, to confront the Jewish enemy in Germany alongside socialists and Democrats and communists and so on and so forth. Hitler is both, in a sense, always, and when faced with these kind of surges of spontaneous violence from below, both gratified by it, but also worried that it could get out of hand, and that he decides he must give it some direction and give it some order and discipline. He must channel it. And so in March, after the initial elections that did not give him the absolute majority he wanted, and with the Enabling Act that does, in fact, give him the power that he needs, he decides to channel the spontaneous activism by party radicals towards the economy rather than towards the institutions of government. And what he declares, and this in particular is response to the fact that what was happening in Germany was getting considerably negative critical coverage in the world press. Many newspapers abroad were describing, in fact, that the legal revolution was not so legal, and all sorts of violence was, in fact, taking place, and that this angered Hitler. And he declares that in punishment for German Jews feeding atrocity stories to the Jewish press abroad, the press, whenever it criticizes them, is always the Jewish press, international Jewish press. Anything that criticizes them becomes almost ipso facto tainted by being Jewish in some way. He declares German Jews will be held responsible and that there will be a boycott in Germany of German businesses. And so April 1st is set as the day at which Germans will not do business with Jews. And the man put in charge of organizing this is perhaps the most notorious anti-Semite among all of the unsavory anti-Semites in the Nazi Party, a man named Julius Streicher. He was both the Gauleiter of the city of Nuremberg, so he hosts the Nazi Party rallies there, but he also is the editor of a particularly obscene anti-Semitic publication, one that is filled with all sorts of innuendo about the Jewish threat being a sexual threat, about swarthy Jewish men raping beautiful, pure Aryan women and that sort of thing, and that his anti-Semitism is most explicitly sexual in its nature, portraying the Jewish threat in sexual terms. Streicher is not a particularly good organizer, but he is the one who symbolizes, if anything, the most activist anti-Semitic wing of the Nazi Party. So on April 1st, the boycott is scheduled and called, and on that day, Germans are not to shop in Jewish stores. The SA is called out, where they will stand in front of Jewish stores and businesses to police this. They will paint Stars of David on windows of Jewish businesses and write slogans, Aryans don't shop here, and so on and so forth. The boycott did not, in fact, come off very successfully. It turned out fomenting direct action from below was not going to be a very effective way of carrying out anti-Jewish policy. For one thing, many Jewish businesses simply closed and didn't even try to open, so there wasn't much to be achieved. In many areas where Jewish businesses did open, anti-Nazis went and shopped there demonstrably, because this was one way you could, in fact, show your dissent from the regime, and that this didn't provide the witness of all Germany determined not to shop in Jewish businesses that they had hoped to achieve. And it also demonstrated very quickly that taking direct action in the economy could have unintended consequences. This is where the Nazis first discover, in a sense, the law of unintended consequences. They have, on the one hand, claimed that they are going to put Germany back to work. One of the first initial things that Hitler has to do as a priority is to overcome the Great Depression and the unemployment intensifying policies of the Hunger Chancellor Brüning and put Germany back to work. If he can put Germany back to work, this will be one of the great propaganda successes the Nazis can proclaim. And one of the targets that they have of Jewish exploitation, of course, are the Jewish department stores, where it's claimed Jews monopolize the retail business, drive good, honest Aryan businessmen out of business because they won't cheat like Jews do, and so on and so forth. And so the department stores are one of the main targets of the boycott. What he finds out, of course, is that department stores employ all sorts of non-Jewish employees, and if he bankrupts the department stores, unemployment is going to shoot way up, and his promise to end unemployment is going to suffer a great setback. So very quickly, simply out of practicality, one, he has to call the boycott off, and second, he has to lend money to Jewish department stores to keep them in business so that their Aryan non-Jewish employees are not out on the street. And this is a first discovery on the part of the Nazis that when you get into the real world and you take out real policies, they don't always have just the consequence that you intended, that in fact life is much more complicated in governance than they had ever imagined. And that Hitler then backs off from the boycott, declares it a success, and then says we don't have to do it anymore because we have won. And so it is a case of a strategic retreat that is not, of course, admitted to be a retreat, but is proclaimed to be such a wonderful victory in one day that you don't have to do it any longer. But stirring up spontaneous action from below is like a bull in the china shop, is difficult to control. And very quickly, within a week, Hitler turns to a different approach, and an approach that ultimately is going to be much more dangerous and much more effective in achieving his goals, that harkens back to the Gemlich letter. If you remember the Gemlich letter, his first political document, where he says the Jewish question, one, is a racial question, not a religious one, and secondly, is to be solved not by emotional anti-Semitism and pogroms. It is to be solved systematically, first by depriving the Jews of their rights, and then getting them out of the country altogether, removing the Jews altogether. And what happens in the first week of April is Hitler begins the process, the legal process of depriving Jews of their rights in a systematic manner. And the first bill that he does this is one we've already referred to, the law for the restoration of the civil service. And I said the first provision was one that allowed the Nazis to fire anyone whose past behavior did not promise loyalty to the new regime. And that terrorized most civil servants into rushing down to take out their Nazi party membership. The second provision of the law for the restoration of the civil service allowed you to fire all Jewish civil servants. The term was all non-Aryans. They didn't actually use the word Jew. They said non-Aryans, though everyone understood who was to be targeted by that. This is Hitler's first use of the Enabling Act. Still, he does clear it with Hindenburg, and Hindenburg requests him to include some exemptions. So the law for the restoration of civil service and the so-called Aryan paragraph, the model paragraph that bans non-Aryans from practicing, from being in the civil service, has Hindenburg exemptions. And if you were a war veteran in Hindenburg's army in World War I, or if you had already been appointed to the civil service before the Weimar Republic, under the Kaiser, so that you hadn't used a Democratic Party connection to get appointed, but the good old Kaiser had thought you were worthy to serve, or if your family, you were the son of someone who had fallen in World War I, then you could keep your job. Now, by Nazi ideology and Nazi propaganda, there had been no Jewish civil servants until the Weimar Republic came along. The Jews had shirked service in World War I, so there were no Jewish war veterans, and no Jews had lost their lives in World War I fighting for Germany. So they had no grounds to say you can't do that, because it basically countered their propaganda about how Jews were not Germans and had not supported Germany, and then stabbed it in the back. In reality, close to half the civil service jobs held by Jews were covered by the Hindenburg exemptions. So this massively shielded a significant percentage of Jewish civil servants initially, because in reality, Jews had been total patriots, had volunteered and fought in World War I, and had served the Kaiser long before the Weimar Republic. So, contrary again, the Nazis get a lesson in reality. Their propaganda did not correspond to the reality of Jews who were in the civil service. They have it on the books, but it does not get rid of anything like a total purging of the civil service that they had hoped for. But the Aryan paragraph does provide the model now to be included in virtually every subsequent piece of legislation. So in the following months, when Hitler, through the Enabling Act, decrees laws that regulate medicine, regulate the legal profession, regulate anything else the Aryan paragraph is always put in, and that people of non-Aryans cannot practice in that area, or at least cannot practice for Aryan clients. Jewish lawyers can only represent Jews. Jewish doctors can only treat Jewish patients, and so on and so forth. So the model for a whole slew of legislation is going to follow, and it is going to increasingly expel Jews from key parts of the professions. And this whole wave of legislation of 1933 basically constitutes de-emancipation. Emancipation had been get rid of all of the inequalities that Jews suffered from, realize equality before the law. This is reintroducing inequality before the law. This is legalizing discrimination. Jews are no longer equal citizens in Germany. In a sense, this is the civic death of German Jewry. The first step is to deprive them of equality before the law, deprive them of access to the professions, and this is what the wave of 1933 legislation is going to accomplish. Having done that, Hitler, of course, in the summer of 1933 declares the revolution is over. Many of his adherents are disappointed. One, of course, we had seen with Röhm wanting to take over the military side of things. But the other area from which Nazi Party faithful have been shut out so far is basically intrusion also into the economy. Hitler has realized economic recovery is going to require economic stability, normalcy, predictability. You are not going to restore the economy. You are not going to end unemployment. And you are not going to rearm Germany if you are carrying out some kind of nationalization and handing out the economy to party faithful as a reward for their service. What you need are a productive economy run by experts who know what they are doing, who are expanding the economy to put people back to work, and who are building airplanes and tanks and machine guns, not engaged in trying to figure out what their new shop is all about if they take it over from someone else. So Hitler basically, when he says the revolution is over, for Jews in Germany, it means that their economic position in terms of private ownership of property and running of businesses is still shielded. They have been expelled from the professions. They are being expelled from cultural life by Goebbels and his cultural policies. But their role in the economy, their right to own businesses, their right to run businesses, is not going to be attacked at this point. And in fact, Hitler declares it's off bounds. Individual actions by party activists from below against Jewish property, against Jewish businesses, is now to be disciplined, is now to be shut down and stopped. So for Jews in Germany, this is a pause. Now, once you've gone through the first wave of legislation, Hitler's main concern is to deal with Röhm. And then, of course, when he finally executes the SA leadership and takes out the SA, which was with Röhm as the spokesman of the Second Revolution, for a while, Nazi Party activists basically have to keep their head down. You don't want to become seen as the new most prominent critic of Hitler not going far enough. That turned out to be quite fatal for Ernst Röhm. So you have this period of kind of deceptive calm. Many Jews who had fled abroad in 1933 tried to re-emigrate, to come back to Germany. Life abroad was not easy in the middle of the Great Depression. Once Hitler discovers that, immediately they declare that no Jew who emigrates can ever come back, and the doors are blocked. But for Jews trying to figure out, do they have a future in Germany? Can they survive the Hitler regime? The lesson of 1934, after the turmoil and the persecution of 1933, seems to be we've passed the worst. We can still make a living. We still can run our businesses. This is a setback, but life is still possible. We still have a better future in Germany where we own homes, we own businesses. I have a pension coming due when I retire, than going abroad and trying to start over with nothing in the middle of a Great Depression. So for many Jews, they read this in a sense as the worst is past. We don't like what's happened, but we can get used to it. We can live with it. For many Nazis, this, of course, is disappointment, this seeming pause. And by early 1935, the pressure to once again take up the Jewish question, to once again initiate activism from below begins to bubble. That is, the pot begins to boil again. And here Streicher is one of the most important proponents of this. But there's sort of two focal points for the renewed party complaints from below and the new spontaneous party actions from below that are not part of a planned program of Hitler, are not being encouraged, in many cases being discouraged by him, but are taking place anyway. The first is against Jewish property. Jewish businesses are still on the main streets of German streets. Those who had been the party faithful, often coming out of a social background that gave them no chance to get forward economically, want, in effect, to divvy up the spoils of Jewish property, or at least express their resentment against it, and thus attacks upon Jewish businesses begin again in the spring of 1935. In various cities in Germany, Nazi activists set out to break Jewish shop stores, raid and vandalize Jewish businesses, and basically try to set in motion a new wave of persecution, this one now focused on the Jewish role in the economy. The second area of the offensive from below, sparked by Streicher, is the one related to his obsessions with Jews as a sexual threat. And his complaint, Jews are still here, they're still mixing their blood with Germans, they're still poisoning German blood, intermarriage is still taking place, fraternization is still taking place. You cannot solve the Jewish question as long as German men can still sleep with German women. And that this has to end. This sexual pollution of Germany by the Jews must be ended if Germany is to deal with the Jewish threat adequately. You had a question here.
How does that? How would you say that perceived threat of Jewish sexuality ties in with things like the Jewish presence in things like the I'm trying to recall the Center for Sexual Studies that became prominent in the 1920s, as well as like Jews in, I believe in the Hayes book, it mentions that a Jewish businessman was the leading producer of condoms in this new Germany.
Yeah, certainly one of the traditional accusations made not only in Germany but elsewhere is that Jews were a number of accusations in this region. Jews were the white slave traders. They were the ones that were running the prostitution around Europe and basically causing the ruination of young Aryan women, and that Jewish pimps were exploiting poor young non-Jewish women. Certainly in sexuality, in terms of homosexuality, Hirschfeld and his institute were prominently visible, and that the attack upon it and its destruction in Berlin was an attack upon Jewish deviancy. So Jewish deviancy becomes part of this. As I said before, 1933, Hitler was not much concerned about this issue. Once he decides he has to get rid of Röhm, then suddenly he becomes the mouthpiece of middle-class propriety, and Röhm is painted as this homosexual deviant. And not only were the SA going to betray him, they were going to drag German decency down into the gutter. And this is one of the ways in which he tries to make sure German middle class is not shocked by his mass murder, because all he is doing is chasing out these deviant SA men and keeping Germany clean. So he does exploit the issue there. The person who was absolutely sincere in his homophobia is Heinrich Himmler. And Himmler, of course, is the one who gets much more power as the result of the Night of the Long Knives. And he will then become the chief driver of homosexual persecution. But we're going to come back to that topic a bit later. But there's a collection of sexually related accusations about Jews, both prostitution, homosexuality, and this notion that they are poisoning blood, that they are seducing Jewish, German girls for their lascivious pleasure, and to, of course, pollute and contaminate German purity. So there's a number of dimensions, we might say, to the Jews as a sexual threat, and this is for the one that Streicher is playing up in early 1935 is the fact that Jews and Germans can still fraternize, they can still legally get married, and this constitutes race mixing. And race mixing then becomes the thing that he is phobic about. And the Nazis adopt this term Rassenschande, and that is literally translated racial shame. Germans having sexual intercourse with Jews is a racial shame. You should be shamed out of it, and that this notion of racial shame is now being put to the front by Streicher and the party activists in the spring of 1935. If Streicher and the party activists are trying to get persecution of the Jews back in motion again, a man who opposes that, and here's where we get to the countervailing force, is a man named Schacht. Schacht is the one who had been put in charge, basically, of stabilizing the German economy and making the financing of crash German rearmament possible and to end German unemployment. Now, clearly, a crash rearmament program and ending unemployment are going to be two sides of some of those same very expansionary government program. The government is taking a very active policy now in creating work. The Autobahns, they say, is the public face of this. In fact, far more money is going into rearmament, which is the real cause for the end of unemployment. And building the Autobahns, the highway system, is kind of the front for this, and the one that can be cast in very positive terms. But for Schacht, all of this is a balancing act. Germany is constantly facing issues of foreign currency shortages, of the import of needed raw materials that Germany does not have. And for him, any messing in the economy, any disruption of the economy is a threat to his balancing act in carrying out this crash program of rearmament on a shoestring. And so as this attack upon the Jewish role in the economy begins to accelerate, Schacht goes to Hitler and says, you have to rein this in. This is intolerable. This is threatening German rearmament. It's threatening the German economy. It must come to a halt. So here's Hitler caught once again between the economic experts who say, if you want rearmament and the end of unemployment, you can't be disrupting Jewish businesses, and the party radicals who want their day in the street. And Hitler, in a basically totally unpublicized decision, not to admit publicly that he's caught in the quandary, has to side with Schacht and basically lets the party radicals know that these riots in the streets, these pogroms and the attack on Jewish businesses has to come to an end, that the economy is still off bounds. On the other hand, he needs to have a psychic bone to throw to the party radicals, something for them to feel that they have not been neglected or ignored. And that's the origin of the Nuremberg laws that will be issued in September of 1935 in the Nuremberg rally. Every September, the Nazis meet in Nuremberg and have their huge rally. And Hitler decides that this rally, one, he must have a centerpiece for it, and two, this would give him the opportunity to, in fact, do something that would be a half a loaf for the party activists and Streicher and others. And so after actually having already arrived in Nuremberg and realizing what's, in a sense, how empty the shelf of what he's going to offer is, he, on the spur of the moment, orders the bureaucrats from the German Interior Ministry to pick up all their files, fly down to Nuremberg, and to draft laws relating to the issue of German-Jewish intermarriage and German-Jewish sexual fraternization. They come and they work nonstop over the weekend while the rally is going on, and they come up with a draft of the Nuremberg laws that Hitler then proclaims as the centerpiece of the Nuremberg rally. The key provisions of the Nuremberg law that he declares, one is that marriage between Germans, and now he uses the term Jew, not non-Aryan, marriage between Germans and Jews is now forbidden. Sexual relations between Germans and Jews outside of marriage is now forbidden. The employment of non-Jewish women under the age of 45 in Jewish households is forbidden. You can see, of course, what the assumption there was. And that, in a sense, this is clearly an attempt to placate Streicher and to deal with the sexual anxieties or the anxieties over Rassenschande of the Nazi Party radicals. And this is then proclaimed, a bill drafted in a matter of a weekend, hectically in the middle of this, where the Interior Ministry bureaucrats and the party officials have to hammer out some kind of document, and then this is promulgated. Up until now, the Aryan paragraph in legislation has always said non-Aryans. Everybody understood that to mean Jews, but in fact it never defined what a Jew was. Once Hitler has used the term Jew in legislation, what he faces now after September of 1935, after he's thrown a psychic bone for the party radicals to chew on, who have been upset about the very notion of fraternization and sexual relations between Germans and Jews, is how do you define by law who a Jew is? There's nothing in the German current code that stipulates that. By Nazi theory, this race was a biological reality. By Nazi theory, Jews and Germans are different because they are biologically different. But how do you cast that belief into legal reality when that belief is a fiction? There is no DNA test. There is no litmus test. There is no poking somebody's finger and taking Jewish blood that in any way can arm any legal official in Germany to make the decision as to who is a Jew based upon some kind of biological difference. The racial construction of a Jew was exactly that, a construct. It had no biological reality at all, and there is no way to create a law that is going to define Jews in any medical, biological way that could be applied by any official in Germany. So once again, reality conflicts with ideology. Once again, you are facing the unintended consequence is that you have to find a way to define who the Jew is, or you cannot apply the law. And finding a way to define the Jew is going to reveal that there is no Jewish race that you can discover and define and determine in any medical or biological way. But the Interior Ministry bureaucrats are left with the job of now drawing up implementation guidelines. The law has been decreed. The law cannot be applied. The law cannot be put into practice until somebody defines what a Jew is. And this is the problem the Interior Ministry bureaucrats are going to wrestle with in the fall of 1935. How do we define a Jew? In the end, they are going to define Jews historically and religiously, because there is no biological grounds upon which to work. So the assumption will be this. The assumption will be that prior to 1850, or 1848, that turning point that didn't turn, the liberal revolution that failed, intermarriage between Germans and Jews was fairly rare. Prior to emancipation, Jews lived and married Jews, and Germans lived and married Germans, and there was very little intermarriage and very little conversion. Therefore, if you go back to the religion of the grandparents of current Jews living in Germany and current Germans living in Germany, and you consult the religious records of whether they were baptized into Christianity or they were recorded in the synagogue, you will decide whether the grandparent was German or Jewish. Before 1870, of course, there are no federal records. Germany is 36 different states, 35 different states. They all keep records in different ways. Birth records traditionally were kept by the churches and the synagogues. If you wanted to determine who was born when, into what family, you went and looked at the baptismal records of the churches or the synagogue records, and you would determine, this is when this is all recorded. So the answer the bureaucrats come up with, the technicians in the Interior Ministry that must find a way to define who is a Jew so that the Nuremberg laws can in fact be applied in practice, is the following. A full Jew in Germany is someone with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents. Their grandparents are Jewish if their birth was recorded in the synagogue as opposed to the Catholic or Lutheran Church. And Germans are those who have German grandparents and have the flip side of that. So it is the religion of the grandparent. 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents make you a full Jew. Then, of course, after emancipation, there was a great deal of intermarriage in Germany. Indeed, for many Jews in Germany before Hitler, the threat of Jews disappearing from Germany is there would be so much intermarriage, they would simply disappear into assimilation. It wasn't somebody was going to come and murder them, and so we were going to marry them away into non-existence. So basically now, also in Germany, there are many people with 1 or 2 Jewish grandparents and 2 or 3 German grandparents. They are not full Jews. What are the bureaucrats going to do with them? If you have 4 Christian grandparents, there's no problem. If you've got 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents, you're considered a full Jew. But what about that swath of people who, as a result of emancipation, have 1 or 2 Jewish grandparents? They are not full Jews. They are not pure Germans. What do we do with them? And so the bureaucrats invented a middle category. And this middle category used the term Mischling. Mischling was mixed blood, a mix. And you had 2 categories of Mischling. A Mischling 1 had 2 Jewish grandparents. A Mischling 2 had 1 Jewish grandparent. So they're not pure Germans, and they are not full Jews. And they fall in this mixed blood category. Mischling was both a legal term and also, of course, becomes a somewhat less than complimentary term, like in whatever, I guess I won't go further, but in any case, Mischling then becomes the phrase everybody understands to mean someone who is part Jewish, part German, mixed ancestry, not full Jew, and not pure German. They will, over time, have yet a third set of laws that applies to them, so that you're going to get after 1935, in a sense, the laws that apply to full Jews, the laws that apply to pure Germans, and the laws that apply to Mischlinge, and you have 3 categories of legal status in Germany thereafter. Well, up until now, then, we've seen Jewish policy in Germany has been fought out, in a sense, between 3 key groups. On the one hand, there are party radicals that were behind the attacks upon the courtrooms, were behind the boycott, were behind the pogroms and shop window shattering in 1935, behind the push to end, quote, Rassenschande. There have been the Interior Ministry bureaucrats that have drawn up a whole series of laws. The laws for the restoration of the civil service, and then the laws that contain the Aryan paragraph that govern all sorts of other areas of life in Germany, and then draw up the Nuremberg laws, and then draw up the implementation guidelines that make it possible to apply the Nuremberg laws. And finally, you have the economic people around Schacht that say, whatever else you do to Jews in any other sphere of German life, don't mess with the economy. The economy is fragile. We are rearming on a crash program, on a shoestring. We have absolutely no margin of failure. No one can mess and disrupt. and whatever the party radicals do and whatever you do to German Jews, don't mess with the economy. And so you had this kind of three-cornered struggle. It has led in 1933 to the civic death of German Jewry, and I would argue in 1935 to the social death of German Jewry. Once you have the Nuremberg laws on the books, and it is a crime for which you can be put in prison, and if that's too inconvenient, you simply take them off to a concentration camp without a trial because of Schutzhaft, to basically be deemed to have had illicit relations with a Jew. And that applies to Jews and Germans. They're both threatened. What German in Germany and what Jew, frightened to death by now in Germany, can afford to be seen socializing with the other side? Even those who had kept up social relations in the previous 2 years know very well they cannot endanger themselves and their friends if they continue to be flaunting their fraternization in public, to be denounced by Nazi Party radicals, to be taken before German courts and accused of violating the Nuremberg laws, or simply if they are viewed as behaving contrary to the good folk instincts, be sent off to a concentration camp for being thought as Jew-friendly or maintaining these illicit relations with Jews. So the social isolation of Jews becomes a real reality now. Neither Germans nor Jews can afford to keep up friendships, ties, insofar as they had managed to survive the first 2 years of the regime. The isolation, the social death of German Jews is the major accomplishment, I would argue, of the Nuremberg laws and this 1935 wave that we have seen. Now, once again, things begin to calm, particularly 1936. 1936 is the year Hitler is going to host the Winter and Summer Olympics. 1936 is when foreigners are going to come flocking to Germany. 1936 is the year Hitler is going to showcase the new Germany. And nothing that these visitors see is supposed to upset them. Nothing is to make them go home with bad stories about Germany. And therefore, Germany is going to temporarily sanitize its anti-Semitism. All those towns on their own initiatives have put up signs at the edge of town, Jews not allowed here. All those park benches that say Jews can't sit here. All the swimming pools that say Jews can't swim here, and so on and so forth. All the visible rituals of humiliation that have been heaped upon German Jews by local Nazi parties and so forth. All attacks upon Jewish businesses, vandalism and so forth, is not to be there. All visible persecution of Jews is to end. The invisible legal persecution, the sanitized persecution, that's fine. You don't rescind anything you've done. But any visible manifestation of popular violence against Jews, of degradation, of rituals of humiliation, have to disappear in the year 1936. And Hitler will put on the showcase New Germany to impress all of his foreign visitors that all these negative reports about Germany have been a distortion. Germany is in fact this welcoming, friendly, decent country, reborn, regenerated, and all these Jewish complaints are nothing but atrocity propaganda. Don't be taken in. Look how well everything is going. So party radicals have been put on notice, but more than ever before, you will behave in the year 1936. And 1936 then again is a year of good behavior, of no untoward rioting and violence in the streets, even though, as we've seen already, you have legally the civic and social death of German Jewry. While that is the front that Hitler is putting up, behind the scenes, however, things are beginning to gain momentum. In addition to the Interior Ministry, in addition to the Party Radicals, in addition to the Economics Ministry, which have all had a hand in things, two other players are now wanting in on the action. In this case now, two of the bigger players, two of the leading players in the Third Reich, Hermann Goering and Heinrich Himmler, that they decide Jewish policy now is becoming too important to leave to others. They have to get their slice of the action. Once again, if you're always out working towards the Fuhrer, if you're out to gain his favor, and if you're out to get jurisdictions over various spheres of German life before your rival does, you cannot sit on the sidelines passively any longer in terms of Nazi Jewish policy. So both Hermann Goering and Heinrich Himmler basically begin to make their bid to be a major player in the shaping of Nazi Jewish policy, and each brings a somewhat different perspective to this. Hermann Goering in 1936 is appointed to be the head of the four-year plan. The four-year plan was an office for coordinating the crash economic mobilization of Germany to be ready for war in 4 years, to be ready for war by 1940. By 1936, Hitler is tiring of shock. Shocked by 1936, you've taken up unemployment. Germany is at practically full employment now. The slack is entirely out of the economy. And Schacht goes to Hitler and says the economy is overheating. If you keep the accelerator to the floor at this pace, the economy is going to explode. You're going to have shortages and bottlenecks. And once these ripple through, you could bring about an economic collapse. You've got to slow down. You've got to be more cautious. We've ended unemployment. Let's throttle back. Let's be more cautious. Let's sit on our laurels and reap the benefits of this great victory over unemployment. We're the first country in basically the industrial world with a capitalist system that has solved the unemployment problem. Let's brag about it. Let's rest on our laurels and take the benefits. And Hitler more or less says, my crash rearmament program was not to end unemployment. It's to get Germany ready to fight a war. And we are going to accelerate even faster. And since you're such a wimp, out with you, and now we will bring in Hermann Goering to do it instead. So Hermann Goering comes in. He's already in charge of the Luftwaffe and the construction of the German Air Force. Now he is in charge. He is the coordinator of the German economy in place of Schacht. And for for Goering, the prospect now is that basically unemployment is over. German companies are now working at full capacity. Up until now, you had unused capacity. The Depression had basically sunk German economic activity so low that it's going to take a while to get the wheels of the economy turning to the point that they're at full capacity. Now, by 1936, many German companies want to expand. They want to expand cheaply, and thus they are in a position to absorb and take over Jewish competition, take over Jewish businesses, without losing a step. Up until then, destruction of Jewish businesses would have been destabilizing. Now the stage is being set for a seamless confiscation, one might say, of Jewish businesses and incorporation into existing non-Jewish businesses which are desperate to expand and above all to expand on the cheap. So Goering says the time is ripe now to in fact end the exemption of the economy from anti-Jewish policy, and we should begin to think about how this is going to take place. The Nazi term for taking over of Jewish businesses and property and putting it into German hands was the term Aryanization. And that, of course, is a euphemism for basically despoiling the Jews and handing out the spoils to Germans. Up until now, Aryanization has taken place as a voluntary process. That is, it has not been coordinated from above. That many Jews leaving Germany, of course, sell their businesses. Many Jews find that on the local level, particularly in small towns, if particularly they're facing the animus of the local Nazi Party activists who have an informal boycott, even if it's not one that Hitler has specified, basically can't make a business. Imagine a small town in which you have a Jewish bakery and a German bakery. And the Nazi Party cell basically says, don't dare buy in the Jewish bakery, buy only from the German baker. How long will the Jewish baker stay in business? At some point, he's going to have to sell. What is his position in selling? He's going to have to sell well below market value. He's selling under duress. He sells his business sells his house and goes into the city and tries to make a living there. So Jews have been being chased out, squeezed out of the economy, particularly in the small towns and rural areas already, but it hasn't been part of a uniform program. It hasn't been part of a systematic policy of the government. Goering is now ready, in a sense, to do that. The sort of the moves toward that really come in the beginning of 1938, when he decrees basically that all Jewish property must be registered. Every Jew in Germany gets an inventory form in which they must register and fill out every piece of property they own, basically down to the toothbrush in your bathroom. And of course, the great fear they have is if they're caught not registering something, they will have broken the law. If they register everything, Goering, of course, now knows exactly what he wants. He has his target list. So this is the Goering inventory that he is going to have when he's ready to make his move, to carry out not voluntary or spontaneous Aryanization, but to carry out compulsory Aryanization forced by the government from above. Yes?
In reference to the 4-year plan, was it the general understanding of the German people that they would be going to war in 4 years, or were they just interested in getting their economy back?
Hitler says we're going to accomplish everything peacefully, but we have to have a rearmed army for people to take us seriously. And the fact that he does get away with threatening to use his army without war breaking out in the occupation of the Rhineland in 1936, the occupation of Vienna and Austria in the spring of 1938, and the occupation of the Sudetenland in the fall of 1938, gives that a lot of credence. So, no, he's not telling you we're going to war. He's going to say, I'm so good that I can simply, by the threat of my army, get what Germany deserves without going to war. And he gets away with it 3 times. And so, no, he's telling Germany, we don't need to go to war. I'm not going to ask you to go to war. He's planning to it, but he's not advertising it. So by the spring of 1938, Goering is primed to carry out an assault upon the economic position of German Jews, the private property of German Jews, that up until that point had not been systematically attacked, had been off bounds in effect in Germany. Hermann Goering is also interested, and he in particular and his deputy Reinhard Heydrich begin to ask the fundamental question. And that is quite simply, where is all this going? What will it mean to solve the Jewish question? How will we know when we've got there? What does solving the Jewish question constitute? Yeah. Goering is in charge of economic things. Himmler is going to take a different approach. We're now moving from Goering to Himmler. Now, they're partners. They had allied against Röhm, but they have a division of labor. And Goering is going to be left with the economy. Himmler is the policeman, has the police powers. Goering wants Jewish property. Himmler wants to deal with Jewish bodies. And that's the kind of the crude division of labor between them. And so Himmler, and particularly Reinhard Heydrich, his deputy, creates within the SS what amounts to a think tank. And there are many, the SA was kind of often seen as the Nazi thugs. In the SS, they attract the German elites. They hire PhDs from the German universities, they hire lawyers, doctors, all the top professions are heavily involved in trying to get into the SS because they, of course, socially want to be part of the elite. And Heydrich lays his hands on, in fact, much of the young brain power of German universities, and he assigns them things to do. And one of them is to answer the question, what does it mean to solve the Jewish question? And the answer they come up with in a series of memoranda in 1935-36 is the Jewish question will be solved in Germany when all the Jews have left Germany. This goes back to Hitler's letter of 1919, the removal of the Jews altogether. And they, of course, didn't know that letter, but nonetheless they arrive at the same conclusion. And the way then to do this, what this means is that Germany should be made, and the 2 terms you see in the Nazi documents, is that Germany must be judenfrei, free of Jews, or Judenrein, pure of Jews. So those are two terms that you will often see in the literature, Judenfrei or Judenrein. This becomes the goal of the SS in the mid-1930s. Now, up until now, many Jews have already left Germany. A large number of them packed up and fled in 1933. The emigration rate drops in 1934, begins to pick up in 1935, stabilizes again in 1936. That is, as the atmosphere is more or less hostile, they make decisions as to whether there is a future or not. And the answer is that gradually Jews are choosing to leave Germany, even in all the difficulties of the Great Depression. They face a number of problems in trying to leave. One is, in a Great Depression, nobody wants somebody else's unemployed. We have plenty of unemployed ourselves. We don't need someone else's as well. So that almost no country has a generous or welcoming asylum policy or immigration policy in the 1930s. And indeed, as more Jews try to leave Germany, most countries intensify the paper walls, the bureaucratic restrictions on immigration. And progressively, as more Jews want to leave Germany, they are always facing an escalating series of immigration restrictions imposed by the countries that don't want to take them in. So that there is this symbiotic relationship between the number of Jews trying to leave Germany and the legal obstacles they face in terms of no place else to go. Complicating that is that while Germany was glad to see Jews leave, they were determined they would not take their property with them. Part of Nazi ideology was that Jews were an alien group that had come to Germany. They had gained their wealth through Jewish trickery and unfair Jewish business practices. Their property really belonged to Germans and Germany. And when they left, they must leave their ill-gotten gains behind to be returned to its rightful owners, the Germans. So that as Jews are leaving Germany, the other intensification, in addition to rising walls against immigration abroad, are rising restrictions on taking any property with you. So that leaving means not only you have to overcome greater barriers, but you will have less property wealth with you, which makes you less desirable to any other host country, which doesn't want welfare cases, unemployed, impoverished refugees coming in their doors. So the growing German restrictions on taking property out of the country, the growing walls against immigration abroad, mean that German Jews, in a sense, are facing ever higher obstacles to leave. There was one exception, and that is in 1933-34, the Interior Ministry in Germany, always acting more pragmatically than others, as we have seen, negotiates a deal with the Palestine Agency in the British Mandate of Palestine, the Jewish Agency in Palestine, I should say, the Jewish Agency in Palestine. Now, Palestine had been part of the Ottoman Empire. At the end of World War I, trying to spark up Arab revolts, Lawrence of Arabia had promised that the Arabs would get their freedom from the Ottoman Turks if they fought on the British side. The British also, through their foreign minister, Arthur Balfour, had promised the Jews that they could have a homeland because Palestine had been the land in the Old Testament where they had historically had the only place in which there had been a Jewish state. In secret treaties with France, the British promised Palestine to themselves in divvying up the Ottoman Empire. So the joke was the promised land was the thrice promised land. It was promised to the Arabs, promised to the Jews, and promised to the Brits. Now the Brits were the ones who controlled it, and so guess whose promise was kept? Palestine is not given to the Arabs. It is not given to the Jews. It is a British mandate, a euphemistic word for incorporating it into the British Empire without nakedly saying you've annexed it. We are simply temporarily taking care of it, is how they try to phrase it. But it is incorporated in the British Empire. At the same time as you had nationalist movements growing in Europe in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Jews in Europe developed their own ideology of Jewish nationalism. They too should have their own state. This was part of Russell's 14 points, self-determination. Every people should determine its own state. But there was no Jewish state in Europe. Slovaks could have their state, Czechs could have their state, Poles could have their state. There was no land in Europe that had ever historically been a Jewish land, and thus the Zionist ideology in Europe said our only place to go to is back to the land of the Old Testament, to go back to Palestine. And a number of Jews emigrated from Europe to the British Mandate, or to the Ottoman Turk Empire before 1919, and that increased in the 1920s. And after 1933, a place where, though Zionism had been very weak in Germany, because the German Jews were the most assimilated population in Europe, the Jews least likely to think they had to leave up until 33. After 33, increased, of course, want to get out anywhere where they can get in. And so Palestine becomes a land of Jewish emigration. The Jewish agency in Palestine, the Zionist agency in Palestine, then to make that feasible, wanting to facilitate Jewish emigration to Palestine, wanting to get a critical mass of Jewish emigration there so they can create a Jewish state, makes a deal with Nazi Germany to make that happen quickly and more easily. So the Havara Agreement is one negotiated between the Nazi state, particularly the economics ministry, and the Jewish agency in Palestine, trying to facilitate Jewish immigration to the British Mandate as laying the demographic foundations for the creation of a Jewish state in accordance with their Zionist ideology. What did the Havara Agreement do? The Havara Agreement basically allowed the following. Jews in Germany that wanted to go to Palestine could place their property in a locked account in Germany, liquidate their property, and place all of that into a locked account in Germany. Once they actually emigrated to Palestine, the Jewish agency in Palestine basically split the spoils of the Nazi regime. The Nazi regime got some of that deposited money, and the Jewish agency in Palestine got some of that money. But they could only spend that money in Germany, which is to buy German goods, export those German goods, sell them abroad, and then give some of the proceeds to the original Jewish immigrant who had left Germany to Palestine. That is, a German Jew leaving Germany in cooperation with the Jewish agency in Palestine could recover a fraction of their property in a way that emigrating to no other country permitted. Now, the cost of this was that the Jewish agency in Palestine, by buying German goods, taking them abroad and selling them abroad, was breaking the Jewish boycott against German exports. You had a conflict between some people abroad in the world, particularly that wanted to punish Germany for its persecution of Jews by not buying anything produced in Germany. If it's made in Germany, don't buy it. And you had the Jewish agency in Palestine saying, if you want to rescue Jewish bodies, you have to do it by buying German goods. This is a devil's compromise that has to be made. It is the lesser evil. So there was fierce arguments within the Jewish community over whether this was a good or a bad thing. And some opposed it and some were for it. But it did offer the opportunity for some Jews to leave Germany and recover a fraction of their property if they went to the Palestine Mandate. That agreement stays in basically in practice all the way up until 1939. Many Nazis attacked it. You're letting property go. We don't want to give up any, not even a fraction of property. And Hitler said Jewish emigration is a priority. Getting Jews out of Germany altogether is more important than keeping every last pfennig. A small amount going is worth the price to pay. And whenever within Germany the Havara Agreement was attacked, Hitler in the end would side with those proponents of it and against those trying to shut it down. So the Havara was attacked by ardent Nazis within Germany, attacked by many in the world Jewish community, but it was an agreement of convenience between pragmatic Nazis on the one hand and the Jewish agency in Palestine on the other, in which each got something they thought was worth whatever they were giving up. So there is that, basically up until 35, 36, there is limited and difficult immigration from Germany, only one trickle of which, in fact, can recover any of their property. For the SS, then, the goal becomes to replace voluntary emigration with forced emigration. What can we do to make life in Germany so miserable and so precarious that no matter what the obstacles are to departure, German Jews will bail and leave anyhow? And what you have to do in this view was to make things so dangerous, so threatening, that even if they can't take their property, and even if there's no legal emigration abroad, Jews will flee Germany, will cross illegal boundaries, will do anything to get out, because the alternative is they've realized they have no future in Germany. Now, how do these work out? How do Himmler and Goering, in a sense, come into the game and begin to play their fateful role? As I said, in the spring of 1938, Goering takes his inventory. He's got his target. Before he can go into action, however, the Germans invade Austria and annex Austria in what is referred to as the Anschluss. The Anschluss, again, is a euphemism. You merged Austria with Germany. Germany occupies and conquers Austria, but there were many German-speaking people in Austria who welcomed that. Hitler travels to Vienna. The streets are lined with cheering people. Initially, Austrians were quite enthusiastic about joining the powerful, prosperous Germany. Later, many of them regretted having supported that, but the regrets came too late. In any case, Hitler in 1938 makes a bloodless invasion of Austria, as the British say. Who is going to go to war to stop Germans from marching into their own backyard where they're greeting by cheering crowds? How do you ask an English soldier to die to keep Austrians from welcoming Hitler to Vienna? You can't do that. You can't define self-determination. Part of Wilson's thing was self-determination. One exemption to that was Austria. Austria was not allowed to join Germany in 1919. They were the one people denied self-determination. And no one is going to go to war now to stop Austrians from joining Germany when that seems to be the will of most Austrians. And they are cheering Hitler, and no one is going to go get their sons killed in order to stop that. So it's a bloodless invasion celebrated by most of the inhabitants of Austria. Needless to say, not celebrating this are Austrian Jews. When the Germans come into Austria, Himmler now has the opportunity to get in on the ground floor. That as much of Jewish life in Germany was run by various bureaucrats who were enforcing these various laws, he can get in on the ground floor immediately because the SS will travel with the German army. And the man he sends as his front man, the point man for dealing with the Jews of Austria, is going to be a fairly obscure SS officer who had worked in one of Reinhard Heydrich's think tanks, a man named Adolf Eichmann. No one had heard of Adolf Eichmann until now. This is going to be his opportunity for a lightning career. If you work towards the Fuhrer and then do things that without waiting to be asked, you're going to be rewarded with rapid promotion, and Eichmann is going to make his career on the basis of having got in on the ground floor in Austria. What does Eichmann do? Eichmann arrives and immediately wants to realize the SS policy of driving Jews out of Austria as fast as they can. How to vastly intensify the rate of emigration when you're not hobbled by all these other regulations. In Germany, many German Jews would, first of all, they had to apply for an exit permit. And then you had to go to all these different bureaucrats and deal with all the paperwork concerning selling your house, dealing with your pension, and then you had to go to various embassies and get transit visas and a country that finally would give you a visa to enter. And by the time you had finished all of that, some of the permits you got to start with had already expired, and you could spend days standing in lines, racing, trying to get all of your paperwork in order. For Eichmann, there is going to be no red tape strangulation of immigration. We are going to express line it. We're going to streamline it. And so what he does basically upon entering Austria is confiscate a Jewish villa, bring all representatives of the different authorities who need to cooperate, put them around a horseshoe table, and Jews come in and they go from one person to the next, sign away your house, sign away your pension, sign away this, sign away that, get your exit permit, and a stamp you can leave, and if you don't leave the country within 48 hours, we're going to arrest your husband or whoever else and hold him in a camp until you do. And voila, the emigration rate from Austria explodes, vastly exceeds what the Germans have been capable of achieving in Germany itself. And so this forced emigration, this express line emigration that Eichmann sets up is potent. And Eichmann has another principle. Because to get into other countries, you almost always have to have what was called show money. That is, you had to come in with enough in your wallet that you weren't going to be an immediate public charge. To get through with your transit visa, you had to have a certain amount of money. And so what he does is basically set up a fund that taxes the wealthy Jews to pay the show money for the poor Jews. Jews are going to finance their own emigration. Jewish money will be used to finance the expulsion of Jews from Austria. And so he settles the financial as well as the bureaucratic issues in a very clever and dynamic way. And this becomes the model. Once he has established the model of how you actually force people to emigrate really quickly, you follow the Eichmann model, and he's then sent to set up an office in Prague, and eventually he'll be brought back to Berlin to do that there, where he becomes Reinhard Heydrich's advisor for Jewish affairs. And the man who develops an expertise of how to chase Jews out of countries will then become Heydrich's expert on how you move Jews from one country to another, from France to Auschwitz in particular. He'll become the transportation expert of the final solution. But he makes his career, he establishes his credentials in Vienna. So by the spring-summer of 1938, you have this vast wave of Austrian emigration that is flooding out. Much of it involves, in fact, illegal immigration. If you can't get a visa, the SS will put you on a truck to the border and slip you over the border into Yugoslavia, and you can fend for yourself from there. They don't much care whether you're an illegal immigrant or a legal immigrant as long as you're out of Austria. So the emigration rate is both a legal one and an illegal one. And as I say, they're not particular about that at all. At that point, Europe clearly sees itself facing an immigration crisis. The world sees itself facing an immigration crisis. This is like at those points, say, when Syria was really imploding and you got that huge wave into Turkey and people began trying to get across to the Greek islands into Europe in the hundreds of thousands. Well, this is somewhat what Europe saw itself facing then. And the result was that at least some world leaders said, what do we do about this? And so FDR, the American president, says, well, we should have an international conference to deal with this. And so at the Swiss town of Evian, where you would have a kind of neutral country to meet in, Roosevelt invites representatives of the various countries of the world to meet to discuss the emigration crisis. Germany refuses to come. Germany says the only reason you want us to come is so you can blame us for the crisis. And all you have to do is you don't like what we're doing about Jews, open up your gates and welcome them if you're so friendly to Jews. But we're not coming to some international platform where you blame all of this on us. So they don't attend. But Roosevelt wrestles with the issue of how to get the crisis solved. But what he runs into, as any German Jew could have told them earlier, is that everybody wants someone else to take the Jews in. Nobody is willing to change their immigration laws to welcome Jews. The most generous offer is the dictator of the Dominican Republic, Trujillo, agreeing to taking a few hundred German Jews. But most people won't change their law at all. And the Evian conference simply demonstrates the utter incapacity of the world to deal with this wave of asylum seekers, of refugees, in any constructive way. No one agreeing, if you take so many, we'll take so many, no burden sharing. So it was, in fact, an even far less productive response than, say, what happened in response to the Syrian crisis. And the Nazis, of course, make great hay of this. They all want to blame us, but no one else wants Jews either. They criticize us about what we're doing about the Jews. They claim Jews are so valuable, but they won't take them. They just want to criticize us. Inside Germany, Goering now is beginning to cash in on his inventory. And so over a series of laws, beginning in the summer, he begins to ban Jews from legally operating in various parts of the economy. Jews may not sit on boards of governing boards of corporations. Jews may not hold stock in certain kinds of businesses and companies. Jews may not be a certain percentage of shareholders and whatever. I mean, all sorts of laws begin to peel off that incrementally begin to squeeze the Jews out of various parts of the economy as he begins to cash in on his inventory. Simultaneous with this, with the flood of emigration from Austria, and Goering's beginning to move in on the economy, once again, the party radicals are becoming agitated. And above all, their spokesman this time is going to be Joseph Goebbels. Joseph Goebbels is the head of the Ministry of Propaganda. He is also the Gauleiter of Berlin. He's the head of the party organization in the largest city in Germany. And he is beginning to feel that Goering and Himmler are grabbing all the action, and if he doesn't make a move, he's going to be left out. Here's the real competitive nature of the neo-feudal system of the Nazis. Goebbels feeling somehow he has to do something to stake a claim. Somehow he has to get himself into the action. And the German press and elsewhere begins to foment more agitation. And we know in the summer of 1938, anti-Jewish violence begins to perk up again. Attacks upon synagogues, now in addition to attacks upon businesses, violence against Jews in the streets. So you do have, once again, the pot is in a sense being heated to bring to a boil as well. But what really is going to trigger the crisis of the fall of 1938, really going to, in a sense, tip things into the next stage, is a German decision made in the spring of 1938 in response to an action by the Polish government. In the spring of 1938, the Polish government says that any Polish citizen living abroad must get his passport renewed at a Polish embassy or consulate before the end of October of 1938. You've been living abroad. Many Poles have been living abroad for years. And they must now, if they still want to keep their Polish citizenship, they're going to have to get their Polish passport revalidated. When Polish Jews living in Germany go to the Polish embassy in Berlin or to Polish consulates in the major German cities and try to get their passports validated, almost overwhelmingly, the Polish authorities will not do that. We'll see later, a very anti-Semitic Polish regime came into power in Poland in 1935. They want to rid themselves of the potential burden that Polish Jews living overseas may come back and augment what they already find is an undesirable Polish Jewish population that they would like to get rid of already. So they basically want to make Polish Jews living abroad stateless. By the end of October, their Polish passports will expire. They will have no document that allows them back into Poland. They will become stateless, and the Poles will wash their hands of it. For the German government, the alarm bells go off. The Poles want to stick us with their Polish Jews and provide no way for us to ever unload them. How can you emigrate Polish Jews if they have no valid passport? We're trying to solve our problems with immigration. If the Poles get away with it, all the Polish Jews in Germany will have no passport, no way of immigrating, and we'll be stuck with them forever. So that is the situation when the German government says, we are going to have to do something about this. What they do about this we'll pick up next time. and see where that leads to. Speaking of unintended consequences, we will see where that leads to.